Hi there. So this is our third INF 272 tutorial, and this week we're carrying on with JavaScript, looking a little bit deeper into what you can do with this programming language and making our websites a little bit more interactive. As always, the code that we'll be doing in this tutorial will be available on ClickUp. We again carry on where we left off last week on our car warehouse web application. So what we did last week was to go and calculate the average price of each section using JavaScript. We also colored in red all the price cells that were above 500,000 Rand. So that JavaScript was run as the page loaded. So theoretically, you could have statically defined the colors in red before you built the page, and therefore JavaScript wasn't really necessary to do that. I mean, you could have worked out beforehand what this price was going to be and sort of type this into your HTML, and for that reason the JavaScript wasn't really impactful, the JavaScript we did last week. Where JavaScript really becomes powerful is if you connect logic to real-time events. So in other words, where the user performs some or other action, and based upon that action some JavaScript code is triggered. That is called an event. So what we want to do this week is to work with functions and events. So this is what we want to achieve. As you can see at the bottom, we've got the bottom of the screen, we've got a footer there with some text in the middle. I'll get to what that text is. It's saying no cars have been selected. So what we want to do is, if we click on one of these cards, then it actually changes the text and says you have selected cars worth 250,000 Rand. That's because we selected one car and the price is 250,000 Rand. If we select another one, changes the color of that card to green and adds the value of that car to the total price. If we deselect the card, it changes the color back, and it also updates this price at the bottom. And if we unselect everything, then it changes back to no cars have been selected. So as you can see, the actual interactivity now happens not before the page is loaded, but as the user performs some or other task. Okay, so I want to show you in this tutorial how we can implement this code, and you can also see how this can be a lot more powerful and how this is really the benefit of JavaScript. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Once again, we can open our project. So we have our style.css, our index.html, and our script.js. So if we look at where we want to be at the end of this tutorial, you will see that we need to go and add something to our HTML. So where we're standing at currently, we don't have any footer. We want to go and add a footer to the bottom of the screen. And when we scroll all the way down, so we want to make sure that we leave enough space at the bottom for the footer as well. But as we scroll up, you can see the footer is fixed to the bottom of the screen there. So let's go and start out by actually getting that part in. So as you can see, I've just entered the code for the footer. It consists of a div which has the class footer, and inside of that div we have a div with an ID called total show and a class called invisible, and we're going to use styling to make sure that initially as the page is loaded we know that none of the cars have been selected yet, and for that reason this div is invisible. We've got another div, so the reason this div is invisible, the purpose of this div is to show the you have selected cars worth some other price value. So this must obviously not show if no cars have been selected. The second div is no cars have been selected, and naturally this should show when the user has not selected any cars yet, as is the case when the page loads. So this does not have the class invisible, which means once we apply the CSS to the invisible class, which hides all invisible classes, then this div should show initially and this div shouldn't show. And then we will use JavaScript to actually toggle these. So if more than one car has been selected, then this div will actually show and this div will be hidden, and I'll show you how to do that. Alright, so if you just save there, now we've got the HTML that we need, but we need to go and style it as well. So the first thing we need to do is to actually go and create space. So if we don't give the section a margin bottom of a certain number of pixels, which in this case I do 75% pixels, then we won't have enough space at the bottom. If we scroll all the way down, then the footer would actually overlap with the last section, meaning we can never fully see the last section. So that's the first thing we need to do, and the other thing is to actually go and paste in the styling for the footer. So remember, we've got our selector, which is a dot because it's a class, and footer, so that would go and select the class footer. Okay, so I use position fixed. The position fixed means it's not relative to any other element in the HTML. It is actually fixed to a relative to the corners of the window. So therefore, if we say bottom 0, left 0, right 0, it would mean that it is fixed to the bottom of the screen. So even if we scroll up or scroll down, we'll always see the footer. We then define a height of 30 pixels. You can define it whatever you want. We just went for 30 pixels to get the right size of text, or a nice visible size of text. Background, whatever you choose. Color, whatever you choose. You should just obviously, as a design principle, always make sure the contrast is good there so that the text is legible. We went for center, text align center, padding so that the text isn't against the top, and also line height 30 pixel. So if you make the line height the same as the height of the containing div, then it means the text within that block will actually be vertically centered. So that's just a nice trick to have. And then we make our font size 20 point. Again, that's up to you. So this isn't really important, it's just so that to show you how we got the styling of the footer. So if we save that now and we go over to the one we're busy with and we refresh, then you can actually see we've got our footer here at the bottom, and when we scroll, it actually, the footer is fixed. As we scroll up and down, we can always see it. And you can also see that we can scroll all the way down without the footer actually overlapping in a sense with the last section. The one problem you can see here is that at the moment both of those divs within the footer are visible. So the reason for that is that we haven't implemented the invisible style yet. So let's quickly go and do that. invisible, we just go display none. If we do that, then any element with a class invisible will be invisible. The property display would be equal to none, and the browser would not render that element. Okay, so if we refresh that, then you can see it's only the one div that's actually visible. Alright, so now we've got that styling down. Now we want to have the functionality where if I click on any one of these cards, the color of the card needs to be changed to green. Okay, so the way in which a person can do that is to go and add a on-click event on the div element, this card box element. So one of the ways you can actually do that is to go in your index.html to your card box class, you go on click equals, and here you actually have to give a name of a function. You can either go write JavaScript directly into this, so sort of go hello, that JavaScript would run, but this isn't a good convention to write. It makes the HTML very difficult to read and understand, and this inline JavaScript is a really bad idea when you're working with other people, and even yourself when you come back, it's difficult to work with this code and write JavaScript code there. So a good idea would actually be to link it up to a function. So let's just make that empty for now. We go to our JavaScript. Remember, we had our two pieces of code here that runs as the page loads, and we can actually then go and create a function that says box has been ticked, and there we say alert hello. Okay, so if we then go back to our HTML and we go to the on-click event that we're defining here, we say that on-click, which is the event, then the event handler will be some function in JavaScript, meaning that function will be called when the card is clicked, and that's the JavaScript that executes. So then if we refresh and we click, then the function actually executes. The problem here is we've only defined it for the first card. So if I click on the second card and the third card, nothing happens. It's only defined on the first card. So what we can do is to go and copy and paste each and every one of these on-click event handlers to each and every one of these cards. But that, I'm a bit lazy. That is way too much effort for me. So I'm actually going to show you a way that you can dynamically go and add event listeners. So go and add on-click events to all of these cards using JavaScript and assign the event handler to that on-click event. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Okay, so we go back to our JavaScript. We want this code to run on load, because when the page loads, we actually want to make sure that all those cards have on-click events. So what we do is we create a variable called cards, and we have to, through the DOM, go and access each of those cards. So we actually want to retrieve an array that contains all of these card elements. So as we did last week, we used the get elements by class name DOM method, and we say we want the card box elements. And then what we do is we loop through those card box elements as we did last week. This is nothing new. Alright, and then we want to actually go and say, okay, we create an element or var variable equals cards at index z, and that will actually give us the current element, so the actual card. And now this is the part that should be new to you. Everything up until this point is old news. Here we go, lm.add event listener, which is a DOM method of adding an event listener to an element. So then you say what type of event. Remember, you can have on click, on mouse over, and a whole range of other events that you can listen to. So we actually want to go for click, but there are many events. It's available in the slides, sort of the type of events you can actually handle. And then you say comma, and then you declare what you call an anonymous function. Inside of this, you actually can specify the code that needs to run when this event is triggered. So this function is called the event handler, and this is the event that will trigger this code. Okay, so let's do the same thing. Say hello, just to show you that it works. And if I go back and I run it, I refresh, and if I click there it says hello, if I click there it says hello. Now all of them have these event listeners attached to the actual element. So that, I think you would agree, is a lot easier to do than to have to go to each and every one of the HTML elements. Okay, but we don't want to alert hello. We actually want to change the color of the card when the box is selected. And also, if the box has been selected and it is green, when we select it, click on it again, then we actually want to remove that color. So I'm actually going to go and create two functions called tick box, and it is going to receive a parameter, which is the actual element that has been ticked. And I'm going to create another function, untick box, and it will also receive the element that has been clicked on. And in this event listener, I want to see whether or not the box is in a state where it has been selected before or it hasn't been selected before. And based on that, I can either call the tick box or the untick box. So if it's in a state where it is ticked, then I will call untick box. If it's in a state where it hasn't been ticked, then I will call tick box. Okay, so how do I determine the state, like whether it's ticked or not ticked? We can use a class. Okay, so when we tick it, like when we call the tick box function, then we can actually assign a class to the element dynamically, and therefore the element acquires the state of being ticked. And when the element does not have the class ticked, then it actually calls the untick box function, and that untick box function will go ahead and remove that class. Let me just show you what I mean. So if this, now in this context, when I say element.add event listener, this object in this function actually refers to that element. So it refers to the actual element onto which this event listener has been attached. So if this dot class list, so class list is actually retrieves the list of classes that is associated with a particular element. Dot contain, oh my gosh, contains the class ticked. Then I actually want to untick it, and as you can see, the untick box requires the element parameter, so I actually pass this, which is the element, through to the untick box function. Else I tick the box. So just again a recap, this function should be called when a card box that does not have the ticked class is clicked, i.e. the car is being selected. And the untick box function should be called when a card box that has the ticked class, so it already has the ticked class, is clicked, i.e. the car is deselected. This event handler will decide which function to call. Okay, so remember we wanted the car to actually have, so to be green if it has been ticked. So this is pretty easy, because what we will be doing in this in these functions is to go and say the element, which is that element that has been passed through, dot classless dot add ticked, if the tick box function is being has been called. Okay, so I add that ticked class to the element, and with the untick we just remove it. Okay, so at the moment the only thing this code will do is when a card is ticked, it will see the state, so it will see whether or not it has the class ticked, and based upon that it will call the correct function, and that function will in essence toggle the ticked class. So in other words, if it has it, it will remove it; if it doesn't have it, it will add it. Okay, but visually to the user, this won't make any difference, because we haven't applied any styles to the ticked class. Okay, so if we actually go to the style sheet and we say dot ticked, so all elements that have the class ticked should have a background color, and in this instance I went for hashtag 66BB6A, which is like a green. Doesn't really matter. Now if we refresh, then at first none of these cards have been selected, so none of them have the class ticked. You can even go right click and inspect, and you can have a look at that card box. You'll see that there's the only class it has is the card box class. Okay, now when I click on it, you can see that it has acquired the ticked class thanks to our event listener, and because the ticked class is associated with a style in the style sheet that has a background of green, the green has actually been applied. Now if we click it again, you can see that that ticked class has been removed, and since it doesn't have the ticked class, that style isn't applied to that element. Okay, and we can then go ahead and actually, let me just show you with a bit of a larger screen. This, by the way, is a way to test the responsiveness of your website. So you can select different device types here, and it will show how the web page will render on that particular device. Okay, so here you can see we've got the functionality we want, except that at the bottom the footer doesn't change. So at the moment it says no cars have been selected, even though I quite clearly have selected a car. So we have to go and build out our tick and untick functions to actually update this footer at the bottom. So what should happen is we want to, if a car has been selected, then we want to display the total price of the price of that car. If more than one car has been selected, we want to sum the values in the price cells and actually show the total selected cars in the footer at the bottom. Okay, so let's go back to our JavaScript. In order to update the footer, I want to go ahead and create a update footer that is sort of a single function that I can call to update the footer dynamically according to which cars have been selected or not selected. So what I want to do with that update footer is to toggle the visibility of the correct div elements. Remember, we had two divs in our footer, the total show and the no show. At the start and at this point, only the no show is ever visible, and that's because as we select cars, we never change this visibility. So what we want to do when more than one car has been selected is to actually go ahead and remove the invisible class from total show and go and add that class to the no show, meaning no show becomes invisible and total show becomes visible. So what we do there is we go and first link or get reference to the appropriate elements in our JavaScript. So we say the no show element is document.get element by ID this time, because we're getting a particular unique element that has the ID no show. Then we go var total show element equals document.get element by ID, and here we go, total show. Alright, then what we do is we say if document.get elements by class name ticked dot length is greater than 0, meaning if there is one or more ticked cards, then we have to do something else. So if we have one or more ticked card, then we want the total show element to show and the no show element to be invisible. So what we have to do, we say no show element dot class list dot add invisible, meaning we hide the no show element, and we say total show element dot class list dot remove invisible, meaning we remove the invisible class, meaning the display property which is set to none in the case that an element has the invisible class won't be applied to the total show element. Okay, and we basically do the opposite. If the tick length is 0, then we want to actually show the no show element by removing the invisible class from that element, and we want to hide the total show element by adding the invisible class. So we've got this function that needs to be called, but we still need to call it every time a box is clicked. So what will happen is every time a box is clicked, the tick or untick box will be called, and after it has been called, the footer will be updated. So if we go back and we refresh, then you'll actually see that now you have selected cars worth R. We'll do that part just now, the part where it actually fills in the amount, but for now we're at least showing the corrective at the correct time. Okay, so just to show you again, if we look at the footer and we look at these divs, if I click, then you can see invisible has been added to no show. If I unclick, then it shows invisible has been added to total show. And here you can see how the two change. Now the last thing we want to do is to actually say, well, every time I select a series of cars, it actually counts or sums up the price values of the selected cars. Okay, and then displays that value at the bottom so that we can say you have selected cars worth X amount of money. Okay, so back to our script. So obviously what we would like to do is to every time a box is ticked, to add the price value of the selected car to some variable, and every time it's unticked we want to subtract it from that variable. And then after that, in the update footer, we actually want to then go and take that variable and display it in the footer. So that means that variable, the sum or the total variable, needs to be accessible in all three functions, meaning we need a global variable. We initialize it to 0, so as the page loads, it's 0. So let me just put in a comment there. Declare global variable to store sum of all selected car prices. Okay, then what we want to do is every time a box is ticked, we want to actually access the price cell in that box. So we say price cell, and then we say element, because it's the element that we are busy with. So the element that has been passed through to the tick box function, in other words the element that has been clicked, that card box, dot get elements by class name. So we want to get the elements within that card that has the class price cell, and since we know there's only one price cell in each of the cards, we can just use the first element that is returned, and that will actually give us the price cell. And then we get the value out of the price as we did in each of the other cases, where you use that long-winded method to just remove all the string and formatting characters and stuff to get it in a number format. And then once we have that, if we tick a box, we want to say total plus equals the price. Okay, and we want to do exactly the same thing in the tick box, in the untick box function, but instead of adding it, we want to actually subtract it. Very simple. So if a box is ticked, we add the actual price to the total price that keeps track of all the selected cars, the sum of all the selected cars prices. So we just add and subtract to that global variable. And then the last thing that we want to do is to actually display that variable in this span that I have here. And that span has an ID total selected, so we've got a hook that we can use, or an element that we can actually embed that specific price. So this is the benefit of a span element. You can just remember its display is inline, so it will, you can give an ID attribute to that span, embed some text inside of the span, and it will actually display in line with the rest of the text, making it look like it's just part of the sentence. So if we go back to our script, and in our update footer, remember now at this point when the update footer is called, the tick or untick box functions have already been called, meaning the total variable has already been updated to the correct amount. So now what we want to do is just go document dot get element by ID, so the DOM method get element by ID, and then we provide it with the ID of that span that we want to access, and then we just say inner HTML equals the total, and then we use the toFixed number method, built-in number method, and we say 2 so that it rounds it off to 2 decimal places. So then every time we tick it, it will actually go and embed the total value inside of that element. So if we go back and we refresh, no cars have been selected, then I select the one. Now you have selected cars with 250,000 Rand. If I then select the other one, you have selected cars with 455,000 Rand, and so on. If I untick them, then the value is subtracted again, and if I untick all of them, then the different div, the no-show element, is actually visible. Okay, so here you can see, you should start getting a feeling of how JavaScript really became powerful and made this site a lot more interactive. And you can start seeing how online stores, imagine these cars were different types of products such as handbags or wallets or what have you, and you select a number of products that you actually dynamically add to your basket, and then at some point you click on a buy button or a purchase button, and then you've got these elements that you selected, these products that you selected in your basket in order for that to be processed. But while you do that, there's some form of interactivity happening. So this is definitely not a static web page, and that's all thanks to JavaScript. All right, hope you enjoyed this and this helped you guys. Until next time, bye bye.